I'm April. Standing in the quiet of this hospital corridor, the rhythmic beeping of monitors fills the air, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. My heart is a storm, a tempest of fear and hope as I wait for the news that could change everything. My husband, Ethan, is in that room, fighting a battle against a rare blood disorder. A bone marrow transplant is his only hope, and the wait for a donor match has been an endless nightmare. But it wasn't always like this. Ethan and I had a life that was a symphony of simplicity and joy. We met at Stanford University. I was a junior, juggling multiple books on my way to a study session when one of them slipped from my grasp. Before I could react, a tall, lanky guy with chestnut brown hair and a pair of warm hazel eyes bent down to pick it up. "I think this belongs to you," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. He was Ethan, and from that moment on, our paths became intertwined. We started walking across the campus together, discussing our favorite professors and the dreaded mid-terms. The more we talked, the more I felt like I had known him my whole life. Our relationship blossomed like a flower in spring. Study sessions turned into late-night outings to the local diner, and casual strolls became romantic evenings under the stars on the rooftop of his off-campus apartment. Ethan had a smile that could light up a room and a heart as big as the Pacific Ocean. But his life hadn't been kind. He was raised in a group home after his parents died in a car accident when he was just 5. The system had been his only family, and he had faced more hardships than anyone his age should. Yet, he never let his past define him. He was determined to make something of himself, and his resilience was what drew me to him like a magnet. After graduating, we got married in a small, intimate ceremony on the beach near my hometown. Our wedding was simple, with only close family and friends, but it was perfect. Ethan held my hands, whispered a joke during our vows that made me laugh through my tears, and kissed me like there was no tomorrow. We built a cozy life together in a small house on the outskirts of the city. Ethan worked hard at a tech startup, and I got a job at a local museum. Our dreams were filled with the idea of having a family. We talked about painting the nursery in soft pastels, reading bedtime stories to our kids, and creating traditions that would last a lifetime. But as the months turned into years, and pregnancy tests kept coming back negative, our hope began to fade. We visited doctors, underwent invasive procedures, and even tried in vitro fertilization. Each failed attempt felt like a punch in the gut, shattering our dreams a little more each time. Ethan was my rock through it all. He never blamed me, never showed a hint of disappointment. Instead, he held me close on those nights when I sobbed myself to sleep, whispering words of comfort in my ear. "We'll get through this, April. Family isn't just about blood," he would say. But deep down, I felt like I was failing him, like I couldn't give him the one thing he wanted most. Then, Ethan started getting tired. At first, he brushed it off as the stress of work and the emotional toll of our infertility struggles. But as the days went by, the fatigue got worse. He started losing weight, and strange bruises appeared on his body. One night, a nosebleed wouldn't stop, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. We went to the hospital, and the diagnosis was a rare hematic disorder. His bone marrow wasn't producing enough blood cells, and without a bone marrow transplant, he wouldn't survive. The news hit me like a freight train. I felt like I was in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Donors were typically family members, but Ethan had no relatives he knew of. The registry was our only hope, but the chances of finding a match were slim. As the days turned into weeks in the hospital, I felt like I was drowning in despair. I blamed myself for not being able to give Ethan a child who could potentially be his donor. The guilt was like a heavy weight on my chest, suffocating me. But Ethan, as always, was there to comfort me. "This isn't your fault, April. You're my family, and that's all that matters," he said, his voice weak but determined. One afternoon, as I sat in the hospital courtyard, trying to find a moment of peace, I overheard two nurses talking. "I swear, there's a man in the outskirts who looks exactly like the patient in ICU," one of them said. "Same build, same face. It's uncanny. My ears perked up, and I leaned in closer. The other nurse laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the thought. Memories of Ethan's early attempts to find his biological family came flooding back. He had searched through old records, made countless phone calls, but the trail had always gone cold. He had finally given up, saying that some things were better left unknown. But now, I couldn't let this chance slip by. That night, as Ethan slept, I made a decision. I knew I couldn't tell him yet. He was too weak, and I didn't want to give him false hope. I whispered to him, promising to find this man and bring him to Ethan if there was even a tiny chance. The next morning, I packed a small bag and set out on a journey to the outskirts of the city. The drive was long and lonely, and the landscape changed from bustling city streets to quiet, desolate country roads. As I got closer to the place where the nurse said the man lived, I felt a mix of fear and hope. What if I was chasing a ghost? What if this was all for nothing? Finally, I reached a small town that seemed frozen in time. The only signs of life were a dilapidated gas station and a diner with a flickering neon sign. I parked at the diner and approached an old man sitting on the porch. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for a man who looks a lot like my husband," I said, my voice trembling. The old man squinted at me, then motioned towards a dirt road. "There's a fellow lives out there, in a small cabin. He keeps to himself. People say he's a bit of a loner," he said. My heart was pounding in my chest as I followed his directions. The road was bumpy, and my car rattled as I drove towards the cabin. When I finally saw it, it looked like it had been through a storm. The paint was peeling, and the porch was sagging. An old pickup truck sat in the yard, its tires flat. I hesitated for a moment, my hand shaking on the door handle. But then I took a deep breath and stepped out. The crunch of gravel beneath my feet seemed unusually loud as I approached the door. I knocked, and after a long moment, a man opened the door. He was disheveled, with a stubbly beard and tired eyes. But when I looked at his face, I gasped. The resemblance to Ethan was uncanny. It was like looking at an older, weathered version of my husband. "My name is April. I think you might be related to my husband, Ethan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The man frowned. "Related? I don't know any Ethan," he said. I took a deep breath and plunged on. Ethan was raised in a group home. He never knew his family. "But you look just like him. You could be his brother," I said, my eyes pleading. The man's face showed a flash of shock, quickly masked by doubt. "Lots of people look alike." "You're probably mistaken," he said. But I wouldn't let him turn me away. "Please, just hear me out. Ethan is in the hospital, fighting for his life. He has a rare blood disorder, and he needs a bone marrow transplant. You could be his only chance," I said, tears streaming down my face. The man studied me for a long moment, then he stepped back and motioned me inside. The cabin was dark and smelled of wood smoke. He sat down heavily in a chair and let out a long sigh. "My name is Miles. I've spent most of my life trying to forget the past," he said. "Our mother, she was a mess. She couldn't take care of us. I was the oldest, and I tried to look after my siblings, but it was too much. One day, she just took off with one of the babies, and I never saw them again. I always wondered what happened to that baby." I listened, my heart breaking for him. "Miles, that baby was Ethan. He survived. He was taken in by the group home, and he grew up not knowing where he came from. All this time, you've both been searching for each other without knowing it," I said. Miles stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're saying he's alive? That man in the hospital is my brother?" I nodded. "Yes, and he needs your help. You might be the only one who can save his life." For a moment, there was silence in the cabin. Then Miles stood up, his eyes filled with determination. "Then I'll do it. I'll get tested. I'll do whatever it takes to save him." Relief washed over me like a wave. I knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. We drove back to the city the next day. The tension in the car was palpable. Miles was nervous, and I was on the edge of my seat, praying that this would work. At the hospital, the staff quickly got Miles set up for the blood test. The waiting was excruciating. I paced the hospital hallways, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Every time I looked at Ethan, so pale and frail in his hospital bed, my heart ached. I whispered to him, promising him that everything was going to be okay. Finally, the hematologist came with the results. "You're a match," he said, his voice calm. I felt like I had been hit by a ton of bricks. I gasped, and tears streamed down my face. Miles slumped back in his chair, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. "I can save him," he whispered. The preparation for the transplant was a long and difficult process. Ethan had to undergo high-dose chemotherapy to wipe out his diseased marrow, and Miles received injections to stimulate his body to produce extra stem cells. It was a painful and emotional journey for both of them. But then, the day of the transplant arrived. As I watched the stem cells being transferred from Miles to Ethan, I felt like I was witnessing a miracle. Life was flowing from one brother to another, a second chance at life. The following days were filled with uncertainty. We waited, praying that the transplant would take. Each morning, I woke up in the stiff hospital chair, checking Ethan's white blood cell counts, hoping to see signs of improvement. And then, one day, it happened. Ethan woke up, his eyes a little clearer. When Miles entered the room, their eyes met for the first time as brothers. Ethan's lips trembled as he said, "Miles, I always wondered if I had a family." Miles stepped closer, tears in his eyes. "I'm here, brother. I'm not going anywhere," he said, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. I stood by the bed, watching them, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, it felt like all the pain and suffering had been worth it. A family that had been broken for so long was finally being mended. 6 months later, Ethan had regained his strength. He was out of the hospital, and we were back in our small house. Miles had moved into a cottage down the road, and he brought with him his young daughter, Lily. She was a ball of energy, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. Watching Ethan play with Lily in the yard, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. Our family might not have been the one we had originally planned, but it was perfect in its own way. We had found strength in despair, family in the unlikeliest of places, and love that had endured through it all. As we walked along the beach one evening, the sun setting in the distance, I looked at Ethan and Miles, and I knew that we had been given a gift. A second chance at life, a chance to build a future filled with love and hope.